Dambusters raid commenced. Literally the boys, and literally they were boys, Guy Gibson being one of them, really, you know, a very young man. Him and his team were at Scampton. They were ready to roll out, and around about this time all the boarding parties would have been out. The signaller will be out on the airfield and getting ready to line these aircraft up and see them off. I'm going to get a few things wrong here tonight, by the way, folks. I just want to sort of like put that little bit in there, because there's a lot of stuff I do know, but there's also a lot of stuff that I maybe don't know. And obviously, you know, it's always good to get your feedback on this kind of stuff as well. But this is just our sort of like tribute that we've put together for Bomber Command and for the for 617 Squadron 80 years ago, 16th of May 1943. There's a lot of stuff that went on before Operation Chastise, and a lot of stuff that obviously went on after it as well. For example, you know, after the flood, a very interesting book to read about what happened to 617 after the raids, because they continued on as a squadron, and a very successful one at that. But what I'm going to do now, folks, is I'm going to play a little piece out that, and you might want to turn your speakers up for this one and put the bass up if you can. But this is a clip that an audio clip that I took of the Lancaster bomber starting up, doing mag checks, taxiing, and then departing, and then flying overhead. What I've done is I've basically put this together multiple times to make it sound like it's a squadron of Lancs going out. Of course, there were squadrons all over Lincolnshire. All of the Bomber Command sites that were active were also massively active. This is just one example of a squadron going out. On a typical night of raids, there would be squadrons from all over Lincolnshire going out over the enemy targets, and lots of them obviously being lost, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But we'll talk some facts. The boys, it's 21:25. It was 29 minutes past that they went out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get up. I'm going to put this piece of audio on now, and I want you all to sit back and sort of like almost close your eyes and imagine it was dark now. It was darkness. These guys were taxiing out at very little light, and you know, lots of sort of like coordination on the taxiways as these guys taxied out to their positions. Usually doing mag checks right at the front end of the runway before they went out, and then of course the signalman giving them the flash, and off they went. Don't forget that these aircraft were heavily laden as well. That upkeep bomb weighed a hell of a lot, and they had to sort of like take a lot of stuff out of the Lancaster bomber, the mid-upper turret being one of them, and lighten it as much as they possibly could. So they had a rear gunner and a front gunner. I think they had a rear gunner. Again, I need to know. Of course, I've got the Lancaster here, but we'll talk about that in a bit. I'm going to get up, and you're going to listen to this. You might hear a bit of a bop. Oh, hold on a minute. Gillian, I'm pressing the remote and there's nothing happening. It's not coming alive. Oh, mate. Okay. Here we go. Okay, folks, sorry about that. Okay, just have a listen to this crescendo of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines powering their Lancaster bombers off to battle. Oh. Technology. Okay. There we go, folks. Okay, well, what can we say? They're on their way now. One of the main things that they had to train for initially was low-level flying. And, of course, during all that time, the only person that knew exactly what it was about was indeed Guy Gibson and a few other aficionados, within the RAF and of course Barnes Wallis himself. Barnes Wallis being the gentleman who developed and designed the upkeep bomb itself. Many trials, many failures. Initially with a Wellington bomber, blew the underside of the wing off of a Lancaster from the splash of the water when they were testing it at the beaches. But yeah, a lot of testing that had to go on. And of course, Barnes Wallis had to convince the RAF as well. That was the big thing, which he eventually did after many failures. They almost wrote it off, but eventually they did. And so months later, under the guise of total secrecy, Gibson formed his squadron, 617 Squadron. It was a whole new squadron put together specifically for this particular operation, headed by Guy Gibson, of course, and they cherry picked very qualified and mature crew members. So up front, you've obviously got the bomb aimer. A really strategic part of the whole operation, of course. Somebody mentioning here on here that apparently they still had a 7-man crew. They still had a 7-man crew, but the mid-upper gunner was used as the front gunner because during the war, a lot of the time, the bomb aimer and maybe sometimes the flight engineer might get in the top seat up at the front and use the guns, but because of the operation and the importance of covering their inbound with, well, flat guns not going to do anything, but any sort of like fighters that are out there, night fighters that they might incur. But the fact that they flew at low level, we're talking about treetop height here, folks. If it went over your house now, it would be gone before you heard it. It was just an incredible thing, and one must also appreciate the fact that it was done all under darkness as well. So the training was intense, and the amount of time that they actually had to put it together was a very short time indeed, interestingly enough. So you need to appreciate, first of all, how young these guys were, and also how brave they were, of course, having come from squadrons where they would have already flown on operations as well. So they knew what was going on, but these were the top echelon of bomber command that they cherry-picked: gunners, flight engineers, radio operators, wireless operators, of course the navigator, pilot himself, and of course the gunners. 7-man crew in each, and many of them were 55,000 overall bomber command during the conflict were lost. Interestingly enough, exactly the same amount of components that go into a Lancaster bomber. That's a crazy stat. But the operation itself was obviously, with propaganda, it was a great success. It stopped production of certain engine plants and stuff like that, because it obviously fed the Ruhr as well. The dams backed the water up for the Ruhr so that they could generate power and so on and so forth. But it worked. It was a success. But like I say, unfortunately, A number of them were lost, some on the way out, and some, one of which hit a pylon. There's all sorts of stories all over the internet. You can read about 617 Squadron and that particular raid. But of course, in terms of the breaching of the dams, 2 dams were breached and 1 was partially breached, I seem to remember. The Mona, obviously being a big one, which is the one you can see there. What is incredible is the stories that you hear, and one of which was Johnny Johnston, wasn't it? Johnny Johnston, the bomb aimer, with... who was this? He was the Aussie. I think there was an Aussie flying it. Somebody needs to tell me on that one. But they circled. They made like about 5 or 6 runs at it, maybe more than that. I don't know. But that basically meant coming back in with both the flak towers firing at you and holding steady that altitude over the lake until the lights literally joined up, and then that was the point. But each run was critical in terms of speed and height and distance and all that kind of thing, and he just wasn't happy, so he just kept telling them to go around. And the guy up the back was like, oh, for God's sake, will you drop this flipping bomb, you know? And eventually they did. And I think Johnny Johnston, was it Johnny Johnston's that breached it? I don't know. But it was, you know, a very brave and heroic act by all the young men who fought in it, and who went on to continue flying with 617 Squadron. Of course, Guy himself continued on, moving on to Mosquitoes, because obviously the Mosquito was used as the Pathfinder aircraft as well. So they would be commonly known as the Master of Ceremonies, where they would go into battle and oversee the whole operation from high above, the Lancasters that were coming through, and the Halifaxes and the Stirlings and the Wellingtons and whatever. But the Pathfinder force itself was a very interesting and important part of the whole operation, not for chastise, but for bombing missions. So those guys were very, very brave as well. That's a whole separate side to what we're talking about with chastise. And so I'm just going to read a few comments out here, because I did take a couple of screenshots. So there's quite a lot of people. Les Munro, there we go. He was an Aussie, wasn't he? Les Munro was the pilot. Thank you very much indeed, whoever said that. Let me just bring open this chat now, because Weather School, thank you, Weather School. Cy, my dad was a flight engineer on Lancaster bombers. I still have his uniform and diaries and medals. He passed on 4 years ago, aged 93. Had a good innings. Fair play, mate. I mean, I don't know, Si, if he managed to tell you any stories, but there were some harrowing ones which are available to read in a lot of books. But most of the books that I have here and that I've read, like Flying into Hell, these books are written. They're old school books, and they're basically written by Bomber Command crew. And some of the images in there are just incredible. And that's actually about a Mosquito squadron, I think. But yeah, a lot of very, very brave men, and so many people that I've spoken with about their family members who were in Bomber Command, and some of whom were happy to talk about it, and others who just completely blanked it. But it is one of those things where I was very fortunate enough to meet up with a very good... let me just put Dave in there and just... yeah. Hold on a minute. Let me just pull this one up, folks, because I want to get the right. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. David Fellows. Sorry, my apologies. Incredible guy. Was active right up until his death. Literally working as a volunteer at the Balcombe Wings Museum. Great little place to visit that, by the way, folks. They've got a running Merlin engine there. which was fired up by a Halifax pilot. And we actually filmed that. But Dave Fellows was an incredible man, told me many stories about him flying the Lancaster bomber. In fact, this particular aircraft is a replica. I've built it as a replica for Dave. It's called Beryl because that was the name of the chief flight ground crew. It was his wife, and they named it after her for good luck. Did many missions, Germany and Italy, with the ice creams, and his Lancaster bomber was actually with the Royal Canadian Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force, the RAAF. And interesting, their Lancaster bomber was the only Lancaster bomber to try out the AGLT, which is the automatic gun laying turret, which was an early warning system. They had Cigar, which they called, is a little one out the back of the Lanc, but this other one was a much bigger dish, a bit like the H2S radar underneath the belly of the Lancaster, which they developed over time. Very sophisticated, very for their time. It was just incredible, and it is incredible if you look at what we've got today in terms of technology and what they had then. You have to credit the people like the Navigator, for example. I mean, the 7-man, his other 6 men were totally reliant on him getting them to the target and back from the target. They also were massively reliant on the pilot to be so sort of like, in tune with the rest of the crew, so that he could, at the moment of anything happening, like being hit by flak, losing an engine or whatever, he could get that crippled aircraft back, or be quick enough to tell his crew to bail out, and he would be the last one out, sort of thing. Or as these things went down, they corkscrewed. So very difficult environment to get out of. There was a hatch at the front of the Lancaster, which the bomb aimer basically went through. The pilot would go through the window if he could. But so many cases of aircraft with a full bomb load being hit by flak. That's good night Vienna, literally. The Germans used to actually have what they called scarecrows, which they used to throw these great big incendiaries up like to 10,000 feet, and it would explode, and it would look very much like an aircraft exploding. So it would sort of like throw the Lancaster crews out, or any crews really, on any of the bombers. Of course, we must remember that the Halifax bomber was also a very successful bomber, but nothing on the lines of the Lanc, of course, with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Many developments of it. The ones that were built in Canada were powered by a different variant of the Merlin engine, and it was just a phenomenal aircraft. And like kind of, in terms of historic aircraft, the Lancaster, like the 747, the Queen of the Skies, is kind of that iconic aircraft that lots of people, a bit like the Spitfire and the Hurricane, of course, which are very a lot of people can relate to. Unfortunately, we've lost so many of the air crew who've obviously died of old age, which is a wonderful thing that they managed to live through all that time and live through these raids, because folks, they are what, let's just have a little look here. They're only sort of like half an hour into the flight, and we are sort of like talking about them forming up that low-level flight across the channel, and then reaching the enemy coast, and then obviously radio silence as much as they could. But that reason for that low-level flying was to keep under the enemy radar as much as they could. And of course, they had other obstacles that they had to dodge, such as pylons and stuff like that. So just an immense heroic act by every single member of the crew, and we cannot thank them enough for what they did for us, literally night after night, folks. It's very difficult to imagine it when if you read the books, then you would be able to sort of like get a really clear picture of what it was like for a young crew member who's literally just you know, I mean, he's not long left school. Arriving at a base, a squadron, amongst nobody that he knows, teaming up with his crew, which was itself a very interesting sort of situation where all of the crews would be literally put into a massive hall or whatever, and they would go around. The pilot would pick his flight engineer, and his flight engineer would say, "Oh, I know a good rear gunner. Let's go and have a word with Frank over there." Frank comes in as the rear gunner, and then they just say, "Oh yeah, well I know someone who's a wireless operator. He's really good. He's been with so and so, and he's because really at the end of the day, you need to trust them all." And that was the most important. The key factor is trusting everyone, trusting the rear gunner that he's got his eyes open and he's looking around for exhaust flames from night fighters or seeing any kind of action around him. Very difficult to do when you're just peering out there into the darkness, you know. And the bomb aimer, obviously on the way out, it's kind of there's not a great deal for him to do other than sort of like be there and be ready. He might get up into the front guns if they've got night fighter action on the way in. Of course, the flight engineer is overseeing the engines, the temperatures, making sure everything's running smoothly. Wireless operators are keeping in touch with as much as he can in terms of communicating with the ground, but after a certain time that went out, and of course they had to have radio silence. And then you know, the navigator, again, key element to the whole thing, because I was never really in any way, and even now, I mean, when I speak to pilots and they show me their maps and they show me the waypoints and all that kind of thing, you really have to know all your computer stuff. And you know, the computers that they had, these amazing at the time, almost like the slide rule that you used to have at school with all the different numbers on it, and they just so very intelligent to be able to do that and figure out, like, you know, the wind slip as well. There was always winds. They would be informed about winds, which were always never really true. So you get drift off of the line, and then of course once you come to the target, you got searchlights, you've got flak guns. And the flak, you could literally, as a lot of pilots have said, you could literally get out and walk on it. It was like boom, 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 you know, and you're flying through. You could smell the cordite, you know, as you're flying into it. And at one point, you have to fly straight and level for about 30 seconds after you've dropped the bombs, because we'll come to that in a second. But the bomb run itself, the run in, what you got to appreciate as well is you've got other squadrons that have got their Lancasters all up, so they're all trying to time it so that they can get to the target and follow each other in and do what they have to do and get the hell out. But lots of collisions and near collisions. That's why, again, you know, you'd have the mid-upper gunner and the rear gunner, and probably the bomb aimer giving ideas to the pilot. Watch out! You've got a Lancaster below you. Don't drop the bombs yet, you know, because they all flew at different altitudes. It was carnage out there over the target, but. You know, that bomb run in was where you were vulnerable. Bomb doors open, you know, you get a bit of flak in there, you're gone, you know, or you get an engine taken out and the wing just blows up. It's just like, you know, those sorts of things were the things that you can read in these books about what happened, you know, on the night, any given night. And literally it was every night, folks, you know, youngsters in very cold environments, especially in the winter, because the winter months were the months where these raids really took place. Chastise was planned so that they would reach the target at a certain point, all under darkness. But with the main raids in the winter, they had longer to go, so they could start them at like 5. They could take off at 5 o'clock when it's dark, and have the whole night to go out there and do their stuff. But you know, 9-hour missions, that kind of thing. Insane. But the run into the target, you're obviously massively vulnerable. And then bombs gone. But then when bombs have gone, bomb doors close. You've got to fly straight level for around about 30 seconds. And the reason for that is because in your payload, whatever it might be, 500-pounders, cookies, whatever. There'd probably usually be one cookie and a load of incendiaries and a couple of 500-pounders. Or maybe more, depends on the payload. But within that payload would be the camera flash. So there would be a huge flash when it above the target, and that would be where the camera on board the aircraft went off, and that would be the proof of whatever they could get. The photography wasn't all that good, to be honest with you. There was but at least it gave the station something to look at when and if they made it back to base. And of course, once they've made it back to base, with Chastise, it was all across the news. The bombing missions in Germany were obviously they were going on nightly, but really, to be honest, only the big major raids were the ones that the papers picked up on, sort of like a lot of propaganda. We did this and we did that. But what was truly happening behind the scenes was horrendous, really, in terms of losses. So these guys, they had to do it night after night, especially in the winter, in cold huts with their mates. If they were lucky enough to come back that night, they'd head straight down the boozer if they could, get the last round in of highly watered down beer, and then all get in their 7 and just head back to base, go to bed, wake up in the morning, and there'd be like 7 bunk beds that are empty, because they didn't make it back. Could be prisoner of war. There's always that option, which was a better thing for them, to be honest. Although, again, you have to appreciate that when you're landing in a territory like that, and really you're landing in the enemy's territory, there were a lot of cases of pilots, of air crew being very badly treated by the locals, and sometimes killed, unfortunately. But so brave. And the stories, folks, there are stories of men getting shot down over Germany. There's one I read, which the whole book was about him making it back from Germany to the UK, getting back in the RAF, in the bomber again, and just going back out there and doing it again. Unbelievable story. Total heroes. And I was speaking to somebody today about my middle name is Spencer, and my dad named me after Churchill, which was a good thing, probably back then. But I have mixed feelings about Churchill, and I know there's a lot of people who think he was an amazing man, and he was. He held the country together really well. He did a lot of good things, kept the morale up, told the fire stations, whatever you do, don't let the pubs get bombed. For God's sake, keep the pubs. And that's why when you drive around London, you see these old boozers right on the corner of the street with like high-rise blocks of offices or whatever either side, with this beautiful old boozer there. So they were adamant, that and St Paul's, that they would keep, as good as they could, to keep the morale for the people going. You needed that in time of war. And but unfortunately, because of Dresden and other bombing missions, unfortunately, it's a terrible thing. War is a horrendous thing. But in the defence of the 7 men that are in those aircraft, not one of them was in any way able to, because their life was just like that. They weren't able to. Obviously, they were like, they were thinking that, as far as they were concerned, they were bombing industrial targets. Now, unfortunately, you're going to get creep back, what they call creep back, where the bombs hit, and then you get unfortunate, very firestorms and all that kind of stuff. Because don't forget, back then these cities were wooden. Hamburg, wooden. Unfortunate, such a beautiful city, just burnt to the ground because of the unfortunate circumstances. But those men in there, they just were doing a job at the end of the day. They had to do their job. They had to do their 30 missions, and then if they were lucky, they get passed on to do something else. But a lot of them went back and did another 30 missions, folks. With fear. I'm not saying without fear, because who wouldn't be fearful, especially the night before, on the raid before, you'd been, had a huge amount of flak. It's come through the side of the cabin. It's knocked out your wireless operator. He's dead. You've got a replacement wireless operator. You're going to feel a little bit nervous that next time out. And then, of course, you've got the ones that flew all their missions right the way through and get knocked out of the sky on the 29th or something like that. It just is, or their 30th. But then there are the stories of those who made it back, which was a wonderful thing. So, I'm just paying homage to the flight crews, the people involved in the RAF. Sorry, let me just tell you about Churchill. I drifted off of that one. Unfortunately, because of all the calamities of war, which he ordered, and when the RAF came to him, he said, yeah, you go ahead and do it, and do what you have to do. And he was saying during the war, Bomber Command's gonna take us through the war, and it's gonna win the war for us. There were many speeches where he talked about then, and then after the war, because of all the sort of like 1940s woke, I guess, he had to keep his mouth shut about how proud he was of Bomber Command. So when they issued medals, none of Bomber Command received any medals, which was an absolute travesty as far as I'm concerned. Many years later, and you can see it in London, the Bomber Command Memorial is now there. I was very fortunate to be a little tiny piece of getting that medal for them, even though it was a tiny little piece, but I did something for the effort. I was very fortunate to meet lots of veterans. There's still a few out there, but they're few and far between now, and we must remember them. We must remember them. 80 years ago is just for the Chastise raid. But let me tell you, folks, that when you read some of these books about these guys, heroic endeavour, remarkable story of one of the Pathfinder squadrons. It's a force attack, the Victoria Cross, and 206 brave men. That's an amazing book to read. But this is what's interesting, and this is only 3. Okay, this is only 3. These are the books. These are the losses of all the men from Bomber Command. I've earmarked quite a few of them. That's one of the thin ones, and this is one of 2 extremely thick ones that I've got. I mean, on each 2 pages you got that many men, so it just kind of puts it into perspective that all those young men, each and every one of them, died for us. Simple as that. And had fear. I'm not going to say they didn't have fear, but they were bloody brave. And so don't just remember when you see the Lancaster bomber, don't just remember Chastise, because it was an amazing achievement by everybody involved. Unfortunately, Guy Gibson didn't make it through the war. He went up in the Mosquitoes, and he was lost. Some people say he hit a pylon or on his way back from a raid. But yeah, a great loss, because he was an amazing commander. Lots of people said he was a bit angry, but he was an amazing man. When he wanted stuff done, he got it done, and that's why it was a success, because there was no faffing around with it. He just said, I want it this way, and we're going to do it this way, and all his crew stood behind him, every single one of them. And some amazing men were lost during that raid. Far too many to mention, because I would be here for about another 40 minutes reading them out individually. But I would recommend just to go to some of the amazing Wikipedia pages that you can see on 617 Squadron, but also on Bomber Command. Have a read of it. Go to some of the links, because all of the little highlighted blue links are very interesting, because you can go out of that, you can come back to it, you can read about Chastise, how it started. I actually play golf at a golf course not far from here, where the testing was done for the initially with the marbles on the water. There's a lake there, and it's apparently they're still down there. But he used golf balls and all that kind of stuff before he did arrived with the right design. Initially it was a ball, and then it's sort of like turned into something that broke apart, and then it was a barrel, literally a barrel, and then that was a steel barrel that was spun up underneath the Lancaster. Of course the Lanc had to be specially designed and rigged up. I mean, that alone, you know, just that alone, refabricating the underside of a Lancaster and rigging it up with a mechanism that can spin a bomb at so many revs. It had to be so many revs, so when it hit the water it would bounce forward, and that was critical with the timing and all that kind of stuff, because it just bounced straight over the parapet. You know, just incredible that they managed to do what they managed to do. Great shame so many people lost their lives, of course, in Germany as a result of it, but it put the war production back by enough for us to be able to sort of like, you know, move a little bit further ahead, and at that time we had a very strong RAF bomber command at that point in time. Once the Lanc was up and running, we were running on all cylinders, literally, and these things were being built incredibly fast by our people, all the different workshops all around the UK, going to one place where they'd be assembled in different hangars and all that kind of thing, under secrecy, of course. But you know, the fact that they made so many of these Lancaster bombers in such a short period of time also pays testament to our manufacturing capabilities as they were then. You know, and all the donations, all the people who gave their pots and pans, aluminium, all that kind of stuff. You know, had like one pot to eat out of and boil the water out of, because all their other stuff, the iron gates and all that kind of stuff, well, it's mainly for the shipping, that was. Of course, there's little bits of steel in there, but you know, most of it was lightweight alloys, and well, as many as they could. But I've got a I mean, the Halifax bomber that a lot of people may have seen that I dug up. This particular item here that I can show you. I don't know if you can see that there, but this is some form of very high temperature proof material. It's very, very heavy. This is the exhaust stub from a Merlin engine, which was part of this bomber that I dug up. But that material alone is just extremely amazing. I mean, I dug that out of the ground like that. I didn't even have to clean it up. It was almost like a very early form of titanium, you know. But incredible that back then we had the technology to create that stuff. And of course, you know, all those little things that we don't think about, like, oh yeah, of course, the Merlin engine had a load of flames coming out of it, didn't they? You know, so they had to work on that as well by putting these shrouds over the engine so that they'd minimise the amount of glow that the engines gave off, so that enemy fighters could see them. So all those little tiny things are pretty amazing. And you know, I was very fortunate to be able to dig that bomber up. One of the amazing things about it, and I have to give a big shout out to Hendon Museum as well, was the fact that in fact it's on here, this board here, which I'll put together, but this here is the top of a cockpit lamp. Now this is the first piece that I found, and that was about 8 inches below the ground, and I called it Cockpit Alley because this thing came down. It's a Halifax bomber out on a training mission from Lindholm, RAF Lindholm, a full crew on board, and they were doing corkscrew manoeuvres over Sussex. So training, and this happened a lot. A lot of crews were lost before they even went to battle. Many of them during training missions and stuff like that. So you know, that's another story you think of, and of course they are included in those books, which are, you know, conversion units, flight conversion units and all that. And this was from a heavy conversion unit. So these guys would have been flying previously on like the Wellington or something like that. But they've come over to the Halifax bomber for converting to heavy bombers. But this, when I found it, it had an Air Ministry number on it, a stamp and all that kind of thing. I was like, wow, what's that all about? So I sent a picture to the folks at Hendon Museum, and believe it or not, about an hour later he rang me up and he said, yeah, that was HR 796, Halifax bomber Mark 2. It was doing corkscrew manoeuvres, and it went into a stall. This was the earlier variant of the Halifax, which had the didn't have the D-fin rudders. It had, it had D-fin rudders, but the other ones had pointy bits at the front, the successful ones. But these big D-fin rudders, the whole thing went into a stall. He told them to bail out. They all bailed out. He bailed out about 10,000 feet, and they all made it safely to the ground. Got to East Grinstead Hospital, and then made it back to base at Lindholm, and went on to fly on in the war. But just from finding that was amazing that he told me that this whole aircraft here, and this is part of the flight computer that I was talking about for the navigator, part of the wireless set there. You can see other instruments. This is part of the camera unit itself. Another part of the navigator, and of course, bits like that, which are amazing from the headset that they had, the leather headset. Of course, you want to leave that in the aircraft. You don't want to get tangled up in that. Oxygen indicator, all that kind of stuff. Like this piece here, for instance, you wonder what's he got that for? Well, it's got a bit of leather on it, and that was the strap that went round the pilot's foot. Incredible, isn't it? So things like that are pretty amazing. And I've got this is one that I found, which, and the technical ones amongst you will appreciate this, but I found this under a tree. The tree was rotten, obviously because of the fuel. It had grown, but the fuel had killed the tree, so the tree just went straight over. And right under it was this, which is really interesting because it's either, and I've looked in the Halifax cockpit replica that they've got up at Just Jane, up Lincolnshire way, by Coningsby. Just Jane up at where is it, Gilly? Okay, well anyway, but East Kirkby, there we go, thank you. This is either the one of the levers for gear down or flaps. I'm thinking it might be because they did have flaps, maybe flaps up, down and neutral, but it's three settings there, so I'm not quite sure what. I mean, it's obviously in that top position there, so I imagine. But this is amazing again, the stamps that are on it, which identify it as a Halifax bomber, and from the Handley Page workshops, HP Handley Page. Here's another board that I put together of the pieces. This very interesting, this folks. This piece here that you can see is part of a cable a director, where the cables would run through it, so it's smooth, rather than having it just running on its own. So this would go down to one piece and then go around another piece. But what is amazing about this is the material, which is almost like a very early carbon fibre. Again. But what is interesting is what is written on it, SKF, SKF bearings. So that would have been manufactured by SKF for the RAF, under the guise, of course, of the Air Ministry. This bit at the top here, you can still see the camouflage on it. There's actually there's not one on there, but there was a radio communication beacon above the aircraft on the Halifaxes, and it's huge, and that's a little tiny part of it. But yeah, some amazing things in there, which are all identified, part of the wireless set. Again, more of the helmet, some glass there, and a panel there with details on it, all that kind of stuff. But what is interesting is this that I wanted to sort of like. It's a tiny little piece which is very insignificant, and I remember finding this. By the way, here's the panel of the instruments. Look at that, man. There's the instruments that I found, faces, should I say, which are pretty amazing. Oh, it's got it the wrong way up. Sorry. And that's a serial plate as well. See, it says Mark II on there. Obviously, I've cleaned these up as best I can, but left them as best I can. But there's some beautiful examples of instruments there. All identified, of course, and part of the bomb aimer. This wheel here, you can see that wheel there. That's the bomb aimer's switches, so he can dial in how many bombs he's going to drop. Pretty amazing. Now, this one little tiny last little piece I'm going to show you is very, very insignificant. I think it's. I did actually look it up because there's actually a name on it, and. It's part of a valve or something in a set, you know, in part of an instrument. Basically, there's nothing much to it. It's very basic. But what is interesting is that back in the war, secrecy was the biggest thing. Okay, so you didn't want to go putting your name on stuff. Like this was made by John from 15 Acacia Avenue, you know, that kind of thing, or by a company name, because when these bombers went down in enemy territory, much like the German ones when they came in here, we copied a lot of stuff from the Germans. When their Heinkels crash landed, you know, we took some of their technology and copied it, and they did much the same as well. It was always that sort of stuff going on. But when these things went down, they would break these things apart and have a look and see if there's any names of any places where these were manufactured. So, like for instance, in the Ruhr, we knew that the Ruhr was the main steel manufacturing area, and lots. Oh, I'm not sure I understand. Anyway, but what was really interesting about this one particular piece when I cleaned it up was it's beautiful, it's brass, okay, but it says Coventry on it. It's got the company name on it and it says Coventry. Now, isn't that amazing? Because when was Coventry bombed? Let's just have a look and see when Coventry was bombed. November 14th, 1940. Interesting, because this bomber. Let me just find it. Hold on a minute. They're nearly an hour in the flight, so I'm the top speed of a Lancaster bomber. So this is the crash card, folks. This is the crash card, which I was very lucky. I got from the archives, to the London archives, went in there, managed to get all of this. This is the whole crash card. This is all about the aircraft, but also down here, it's all its history. That's the crazy thing. So 43 basically is when the 16th of April 1943 was when this aircraft went out to, initially it was with the Pathfinder Force. This aircraft was with the Pathfinder Force 405 Squadron. How about that? And I've read up on that particular one. So this aircraft actually carried out missions, which was amazing. And there you go, right at the bottom there, 1656 heavy conversion unit. It was with 1662, 67, and it went into 45 maintenance unit, which was quite interesting because around about the time that the aircraft that happened, this was really interesting. Again, a lot of people are going to be like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about," and I'm not really interested. But there are some people out there, even if it's one, I don't care. This oil temperature gauge here right? That oil temperature gauge. The other oil temperature gauges, or the other gauges mainly, they were all black. You know, the boost gauges and all that kind of stuff. It was all basically black, very dimly lit on the panel as well. But what is interesting is that on one of the reports, this aircraft with 405 Squadron went through, didn't name the aircraft, but it was with the 405 Squadron about the time that it was with 405, and it went on a mission, and it was heavily attacked. And instruments were destroyed, and they even mentioned the oil pressure instruments. And what is interesting, oil temperature, sorry, is that this particular gauge is made by Negretti and Zambra. And that's a very, very famous name. They're very, very well known for fine instruments. I don't think they're around anymore, unfortunately, but their stuff is still around the world. An amazing company. And I think it was a UK, I think it was a British company actually. But they obviously, as were so many manufacturers of like fine equipment, watches and clocks and instruments and all that kind of stuff, they were all brought into the war effort. Can you make these for us? And so obviously Negretti and Zambra made the instrument itself, the oil temperature gauge. And they put their name on the front of it. So again, another sort of like, you know, who are these Negretti and Zambra people? We must, well, they couldn't look them up, could they? Didn't have Google back then. But the fact that it said Coventry on that, maybe, who knows? You just don't know, do you? Because Geezer says, I found this, and it says Coventry on it. Oh, Coventry? What's this? Is this company here? Coventry, that's in England. And it's like, you know, hold on a minute, let's look on the map, bring the map out. Like, Coventry, okay. Yeah, we've heard about them. They're quite, yeah, well, that kind of says it all, doesn't it? Let's go and bomb them. But anyway, you just don't know whether it was just part of the campaign anyway, because we kind of knew where their heavy industry manufacturing plants were. But yeah, a little bit of history about the Lancaster bomber, about Bomber Command itself, and I hope you enjoyed. By the way, I hope you enjoyed the little serenade of Merlins that we put together. What are they doing now? How long have they been in flight? It's getting on for an hour, isn't it? One last little piece, which I'll show you, is this, which was about 3 feet under the surface. Can you see the colour of that? Now that is the colour of the camouflage that was painted on the Lancaster bomber, and this is part of the windscreen, which basically wrapped around the pilot like that. It's amazing, isn't it? Eh? Still got the perspex in it. Look, still got the perspex in it, and you can see the force of the impact was incredible. But from what we could figure, that the aircraft came down quite shallow. And that's why most of the stuff was only sort of like a couple of feet below the surface. But yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit for our good friends in the RAF as well, and for everybody for sort of like spending a little bit of time thinking about how brave these guys were, and that we'll never forget them. I don't ever forget them, because I've got them here visually every day of my life, and I love visiting museums. We've done a couple of museum visits. We've done one up at East Kirkby with the Lancaster bomber. Had a walk through the whole thing. You might want to check that out. And other stuff that we've done, and we will probably hope to do more as well. Of course, there is nothing like hearing the sound of a Lancaster bomber firing up, especially if you're really up close to it. Again, we've done that up at East Kirkby, so we were very fortunate to do that. There was a lot of people who were very fortunate to be with us when we did that. And if you ever get the chance and you're down the south of England, go and check out the Wings Museum. It's in a lovely little village, or just outside a lovely little village called Balcombe in Sussex, run by a couple of brothers who are again passionate for the cause. Been out to many sites in Germany and recovered many artifacts, engines, but every time they go there, they always, if they know that the crew were lost there, they will recover any remains, and they will always put up a plaque at the crash site as well. And they are continually digging these things up, folks. When I fly into Germany, or deep into Germany, I always look down at those forests and I think, my goodness me, how many lost young men are there in there that will never be found. But we're lucky to be where we are right now, and thanks for watching, folks. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Jilly for letting me put this on really last minute. I appreciate it, and thanks for everybody who appreciates it as well. Shall I just read out some comments, Jilly, just before I go? Okay, there's so many. Big Al's plane. I reckon that every airport should have an old World War II plane sitting for everyone to see, even every day they fly. Yeah, there's many. Excuse me. There's very many great. Did that come out, Julie? Maybe I'll have a drink of beer. Excuse me. Okay. Freddie-O, loved your stream. My dad flew in World War II in a B-25, so this is near and dear to me. Again, folks, it's another story. Don't forget, our boys out there in the middle of the night, under darkness. Insane, man, insane. But the Americans doing it in daylight. Brave boys. Bigger air crew. I think it was an 11-man crew on a B-17, B-25, not sure of, but probably near to it. A very small bomb payload. They flew in high streams, and incredibly brave young men from Canada, from New Zealand, from Australia, from the USA, immensely helping us, man. If it wasn't for the USAAF, wasn't it, at that point? Yeah, the United States Army Air Force, I think it was, for coming in and helping us out, man. I mean, you didn't win the war for us, but you bloody well helped us take it to that Schwarzer. And I can say that because he was a completely different person to anybody else who's out there. Deborah Sherwood, when you read about what these guys did in the early part of the 20th century in aviation, you're in awe, big time, bless their souls. Great sound of Lancaster fly today, around 200 feet, Alec Padley. Incredibly interesting, Jerry. Thank you so much for an informative and passionate delivery show. Thank you. Thank you, Nick Gray. Really appreciate the tribute to 617 Squadron. There is a line in Dambusters that was repeated word for word in Star Wars. They even used the 3-ship formation. Yeah, I've heard that. Let's just have a look. My dad was a B-24 pilot, Jim Kay. So great that you highlight this UK history. They should never be forgotten. They should not. Of course, most of those bases in Norfolk with the US Army Air Force and down the south coast of England as well. Yeah, in the Dambusters raid, one aircraft lost its bomb when it touched the sea. They had to come home. 17th Mustang. That's very true indeed. Yeah, they had to come home. How bad is that, man? How bad is that they had to come home? They must have been gutted, mate. Brian Owen, thank you very much indeed. Scott Hetherington, there's a lovely memorial to the Canadians who flew from Langer, Nottingham, located on the small airfield. Wow. B-17 crews, usually 10. Ellis Chernoff, thank you very much indeed. Peregrine, lest we forget, we will remember them. They just rebuilt a B-25 Mitchell at East Kirkby. They're going to have it in taxiable condition. B-25 Mitchell at East Kirkby. Blimey, that was quick. I mean, I know they had a lot of stuff going on, but a B-25 Mitchell at East Kirkby. Blimey. I know that they've got a taxiing Mosquito there now. Incredible. Have you been there and tried to get into a Mosquito? I mean, they got 2 people in a cockpit, like no bigger than what we are here. Seriously, man. You know, flight and the navigator sitting down there to the right of the pilot sitting above him, sort of like head down here. It's incredible. Youth of today will never understand the sacrifice those brave heroes made. Jerry, thank you, Julia and Jerry. Well, you know what? All they have to do is be educated or watch something like this to appreciate it a little tiny bit. There are youths of today who will appreciate it and do understand it because they will have been educated about it, or they will find it interesting in their history. I would say most definitely, if you ever get the chance, go to a bookstore, an old bookstore, and look for Bomber Command books. There's few and far between, and I've got about 150 of them upstairs. Given a few of them away, I have to say, because I want other people. I gave one to my neighbour to read. He came back. He shook his head. He was like, "Mate, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea that's what it was about." I said, "There you go, mate. And you've only read one book. I've read love stories and oh my God, where maybe the pilot or the flight engineer or one of the members of crew has got involved with one of the WAFs." And she was a bad omen because all the 3 boyfriends that she had before, all of them crashed. So they'd be like, the crew would be like, "Mate, you got to ditch that bird, get rid of her." They did. DM Finpar not even taught World War II history, at least here in the US. No, they're not. I mean, I'll be honest with you, man. You could so easily start a school and you could literally divert kids off into their different directions of where they want to go. Are you interested in this? Yeah, I am. I've got an uncle who flew in Bomber Command. I'd love to know about the history of that. Right, well, let's get you taught up. Thank you, J Mank. B-52 was from RAF Hendon, Concorde 444. Wow, RAF Hendon, that closed many, many years ago. Wow, B-25 from Hendon. Thank you so much. Lucky to all these amazing aircraft from the Battle of Britain flight at Duxford. Yes, indeed. Brian Stewart had an uncle who was a navigator, Bombardier, on a B-17. Bombardier, sorry, my apologies. Who was a navigator / bombardier on a B-17 during 44. 3 other uncles were in the war as well. My love of history, and especially World War II history, can be traced back to their service. That is amazing, isn't it? Adam Ross, great uncle, did a full tour as a rear gunner on a Lanc. Well, that's what Dave did on Beryl. And every night before they went out, the guy would say, "Don't prang my Beryl," and they bring her back. Only once did Dave ever see anything behind him which he thought was... They were very lucky. They made it through, and they didn't do the cake runs either. They did a couple of French ones, but they went deep into Germany as well. But he saw something, and I think it was the exhausts, but maybe an ME-110 or something like that, and he fired off a round like do-do-do-do-do-do, and it peeled off. That's about the only time they saw it. Bev Charles, National Memoriam Arboretum near Alrewas, Staffordshire. I hope I've pronounced that right. Alrewas is an amazing place. Charles D went to a trade school where they gave us all kind of different career avenues to go down. There you go, trade school. Didn't know they even existed. Big Mac's so proud of my lad who just started the Air Cadets and will be learning all about historical aircrafts and missions. It's just, you need to take it from that, what I explained earlier, that young lad leaving his house in Croydon, getting on the train, making his way up in the old choo-choo trains, getting to the station. If you go to some of these, like RAF Metheringham, there's a train station which is about 5 miles down the road. It's a little train station, and when I've driven past Metheringham, I've always thought, wow, man, this little pathway to my left, there would have been young lads walking up there to the Air Force Base, not knowing what the hell was going on, probably filled with a bit of anticipation, but also excited for something that they perhaps I mean, they've obviously trained before they come there. You know, they don't just turn up. They've obviously been trained either in Canada or wherever it may have been. A lot of training went on in the US and Canada for the young pilots, navigators. Of course, schools over here. That crazy. It's just you could go on about it forever. Honestly. Melanie, I'm currently teaching film music and we watched the opening of Dambusters. Lots of my students could tell tales of their families in World War II. Yeah, interesting. The movie is very interesting and very sad, especially when his dog dies. I cry every single time, mate. I can't stop doing that. And of course, 617 Squadron went on to continue amazing missions. Tirpitz, I think it was at, what was the one that was at the in the Norwegian field that got taken out by 617 from the earthquake bomb. Another Barnes Wallis amazing thing. My dad's uncle was a rear bomber on the Lancaster bomber Wacker 9. 622 Squadron, including the Battle of Nuremberg. Adam Ross. Okay, meant the B-25 was from RAF Museum at Hendon, which is the one now being made tax abilities. Blimey. So the B-25 that was at Hendon has been moved to East Kirkby and is being made taxiable. Blimey, that's amazing. Mind you, I have to say, the Lank at RAF Hendon, if you worked on the engines for long enough, you could probably fire her up as well. She's a proper ton up Lank. That one in the museum at Hendon. When I say a ton up Lank, she did over 100 missions and made it through the war. But she hasn't been touched since she went. She wasn't used after the war, so to speak. My 15-year-old daughter has just visited the Vietnam War Museum here on Phillip Island, Melbourne last week. Great for them to remember. Watching an amazing documentary on Sky tonight called Lancaster, real stories from all the crew. Yeah, I've seen that and it is an amazing one to watch. I don't know if it's I don't know what time it's on, if it's already on. Good read is Lancaster by John Nichol. Got it, read it. It's about the crews as well as the aircraft. One thing I will say again is that these books that I have read are written by air crew as well, but also John Nichol took those words from air crews, which is amazing. Simon Barrett, I work for Guy Gibson's cousin and get to see lots of private photos of him in RAF and home life and listen to lots of stories about him. Wow, amazing. Every time I go up to Lincolnshire and I get to stay at the hotel up there at the oh blimey, Gilly, help me out. The hotel at Coningsby. Petwood Hotel. Every time I go there, I mean, obviously last time I went there was a bleeding massive great big swarm of wasps, but there's lots and lots of images up there. One in particular is of Guy Gibson standing outside on the patio with his mates up against a concrete plinth, which is still there. Amazing to go and stand out there and have a drink right where he was. Amazing. Tirpitz, Tall Boys. There we go. Thank you, 17th Mustang. Nick Clark. Yes, indeed, it was the Tirpitz. With he got knighted, didn't he? What was his name? His wife They started a after the war. Amazing bloke. Took over 617 from Gibson. And it was someone's going to tell me here, aren't they? Leonard Cheshire. Do you know, I just flicked in there and I saw his name. Leonard Cheshire, another amazing man. He led 617 Squadron, and I think it was Cheshire who led that raid on the Tirpitz as well, using, of course, the Tall Boy. Unbelievable, mate. Unbelievable piece of equipment that is. The weight of that thing, in terms of tons, 8 tons or something crazy like that, slung underneath. Again, another modified Lancaster. Adam Ross, my wife's great uncle was in the Canadian Air Force on a Halifax, but crashed on a training flight in Ireland. There you go, exactly like I was saying, Adam. Amazing man.
When I was a kid, the old lady next door used to be involved in engineering during World War II. Wow, how cool was that? Tirpitz 617 and 9 Squadron bombed it. Thank you for that hobby time. Germany only had 2 super battleships, Tirpitz and Bismarck, indeed. The Bismarck was the one that was crippled, wasn't it? 617 Squadron legend lives on the F-35B Lightning at RAF. Lives on with the F-35B Lightning at RAF Marham. You're absolutely right, Peregrine. 617 Squadron still operational at RAF Marham. Thank you, Peregrine, for bringing that up. Oh, it finished. It was off at 10:10. Yes, thank you, folks. Jerry, if you look up a museum dedicated to World War II aviation history in Midland, Texas, find it something interesting to look at. Thank you so much. Harvey used to work with a German lady from Bielefeld. She hated it when I kept mentioning the bombing of the viaduct. Oh, yeah. There we go. The Bielefeld. That was the viaduct. That was one of the targets, wasn't it? Mike Hall, James Holland's book, Dambusters, The Race to Smash the Dams, is excellent. New study of just how much pressure Gibson was under. There you go, what I said earlier on, indeed. Especially as he had to keep it secret from all his mates, you know, and putting that squadron together. He was a big multitasker, wasn't he? My dad just said Guy Gibson was an amazing man to lead them. He remembers it like yesterday. Bev Charles. Went to Peckwood once for a wedding. There's a Norden bomb site in the bar, Nick Dark saying. Yeah, and that very bar is where Gibson and his crews used to drink as well. So very poignant when you go in there. Thank you, 17th Mustang. Yes, so there we go, folks. Johnny Johnston's book is a great read. The Last Dambuster, Alec Pedley, thank you. It was Willie Tate who was commanding 617 for the Dams raid. Mike Hall saying Willie Tate commanding 617 for the Dams raid. Commanding it, yes. Not flying on it, leading it. But Willie Tate was a pilot though, wasn't it? Need to confirm that. D. Stu. Never heard of the Dambusters mission. Wow. Now I know, and we'll read up. Thank you for this, Jerry and Jilly. Wow. D. Stu, read up on it, mate. Amazing. Even if it's just reading it online, as much as you can get on there, you'll see a lot. I saw the Dambuster bombs last month at Hendon. You really must visit it on the stream. Yeah, I've been to Hendon, and we've done a stream at Hendon Uren. Thank you. Will you take Commander 617 in raid against Tirpitz? Okay, there we go. Oh, okay. Okay, so Cheshire. I know that Cheshire at some point in time commanded 617. But Michael saying that he commanded the raid against the Tirpitz, so Willie Tate did. Harry Rundle remembering the movie about the Dambusters. 17th Mustang, see a lot of Dambuster stuff at Brooklands, including Barnes Wallace's office and also the Upkeep bomb there as well. Today Gibson would be called a bully, but he did what he had to do to get the job done. Martin Smith, very true. That's exactly what I said earlier on. He was a bit of a grumpy sod, but you had to do, and that's what I'm known as sometimes. Hey, Chilly. Right, folks. Thank you so much. Look after yourselves. No comment from Jilly there. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Look after yourselves. We will be back tomorrow, as I said, 11 o'clock from the paddock. Other than that, God bless you. Take care. Have a think about them. Just a quiet and poignant moment, and read up on 617, but importantly, Bomber Command as well. It'll start at one point and it will go on and on and on. Thanks, folks. Look after yourselves. And maybe we'll do a piece on Fighter Command as well at some point, because we need to do that as well. And all other brave men and women from the war. Thanks, folks. Take care. All the best. See you later. Bye-bye. KGP. That's a wrap. God bless you, Guy. And his men. Guy and his many band of men. Many band.